Hello, we are back here with Command Figures.
Hey there.
And today, we are opening a dossier that feels like it belongs in a political thriller. But unfortunately, it is very much real history. We are unpacking the rise, the fall, and the trial of Slobodan Milošević.
Yeah, it is, it's a heavy stack of notes today. We are looking at a figure who really defined the 1990s in the Balkans and frankly changed the way the whole world thinks about war crimes trials.
It really is a massive topic. But before we get into the wars in The Hague, I want to start with the central paradox that I found in the research for this deep dive. Because if you look at Milošević on paper in the early 80s, he doesn't look like a warlord.
No, not even close.
Right. I mean, he is described as a gray communist apparatchik, a banker.
Yeah.
A bureaucrat who liked these distinctively boring suits.
Very boring suits.
And yet this exact man transforms into a nationalist icon. He becomes the first sitting head of state indicted for war crimes, and he ends up being the central architect of the violent breakup of Yugoslavia. So how does that happen?
Well, that is the mission for this deep dive. We have to figure out how a boring bureaucrat becomes the butcher of the Balkans. And if you look at the source material, which ranges from these super dry court records to really fascinating anthropological studies on Serbian poetry, you see that it wasn't an accident.
No, it was very deliberate.
Exactly. It was a very specific formula of bureaucracy mixed with mythology.
So we are going to track this chronologically for you. We'll go from his rise in the late 80s through the absolute horror of the wars to the student movements that literally mocked him out of office, and finally to his death in a cell in The Hague.
And along the way, we really need to look at the cost. Not just the geopolitical cost, but the human cost. Because while Milošević was consolidating his power, millions of people were paying the price, either with their lives or with their future.
Let's start with the setup then. Before Milošević becomes the Milošević, what was the situation in Serbia? Because the sources keep mentioning this feeling of paralysis.
Right, so you have to go back to the 1974 Yugoslav constitution. I know, starting a story with a constitution sounds incredibly dry, but trust me, this is the smoking gun.
I love a good constitutional crisis.
It really was. That constitution had essentially handcuffed the Serbian leadership.
Handcuffed them how? Exactly.
Well, it decentralized Yugoslavia, which was the goal at the time, but it gave Serbia's two provinces, Kosovo in the south and Vojvodina in the north, massive autonomy.
Like almost independent states.
Basically, they had their own seats in the federal presidency, and they could actually vote against Serbia on federal matters.
Wow, so if you were a Serbian leader sitting in Belgrade, you effectively don't even control your own territory.
Exactly. There was this deep sense of victimization and paralysis among the Serbian elite. They felt like Serbia was being carved up from the inside, and usually a communist official would handle this with, backroom deals and quiet memos.
But Milošević finds a totally different way. And the turning point, the exact moment the switch flips, is April 24th, 1987.
Kosovo Pole?
Yes, Kosovo Pole. This scene is so cinematic. So paint the picture for us here. Milošević is sent down there to basically calm tensions between the local Serbs and the ethnic Albanian majority.
Right. And keep in mind, he is just a party official at this point. He is there to de-escalate. That is his only job.
But the situation is just boiling. You have about 15,000 Serbs protesting. The police, who are mostly ethnic Albanian at this point, start beating the protesters with truncheons. It's total chaos.
And the standard operating procedure for a Yugoslav communist here is to call for brotherhood and unity. You tell everyone to go home and be good socialists.
Right.
But Milošević does the exact opposite. He walks out of the building, sees the police hitting the crowd, and he utters this line that just became legendary. He says, "No one should dare to beat you."
That gives me chills. No one should dare to beat you.
That is the moment. One of our sources, an analysis by Marko Zivkovic, describes this as a moment of transubstantiation.
That's a strong word.
It is, but it fits. He converts from a party hack into a national protector. He realized right there in that moment the raw power of national feeling. He saw that if he promised protection, he could completely own the crowd.
Then he rides that wave immediately. This leads us directly into what was called the anti-bureaucratic revolution. Now, I have to say, as a political slogan, that is some A-plus branding.
Oh, it's brilliant marketing.
Because anti-bureaucratic revolution sounds like administrative reform. It sounds like, hey, we are going to fix the filing systems and fire the lazy clerks.
Exactly. It sounds modern, it sounds efficient, but in reality, it was a populist purge.
A purge.
Yeah. He used these massive street protests to topple the leadership in the provinces that were opposing him and replace them with his own loyalists. He basically weaponized the mob to fire his bosses.
There is this one detail in the sources about how this went down that I found absolutely unforgettable. The yogurt revolution.
Oh, that is such a wild detail. October 1988.
Okay, so protesters in Novi Sad are surrounding the parliament building of Vojvodina. The leadership inside is terrified. They try to calm the crowd down by giving them bread and yogurt, like a literal peace offering.
It backfires completely.
The protesters take the yogurt cups and just hurl them at the parliament building.
And it worked. The leadership resigned. I mean, it sounds funny, the yogurt revolution, but the political math behind it was deadly serious.
Right.
By 1989, through these orchestrated protests, Milošević had toppled the governments of Montenegro, Vojvodina, and Kosovo.
So let's do the math here for everyone listening. The Yugoslav presidency has 8 votes total.
And Milošević now controlled 4 of them: Serbia, Montenegro, Vojvodina, and Kosovo. He effectively seized control of half the federal government without technically breaking the system.
He just packed the court, so to speak.
Exactly. He rigged the game from within.
So he has the mechanics of power. He has the votes. But to keep that fervor going, to keep the massive rallies at Ušće and Gazimistan energized, he needed something deeper than just administrative tricks. He needed a story.
He needed a myth. And this is where we have to talk about the intellectuals.
Because the sources point out that Milošević didn't actually invent Serbian nationalism.
No, he really didn't. The poets, the writers, the academics in the mid-'80s, they had been brewing this narrative of Serbian victimhood long before Milošević grabbed the microphone. There is a quote here that sums it up perfectly. Vuk Trstević, who was a famous opposition figure, said, "With his speech in Kosovo, Milošević mounted the horse that the Serbian intelligentsia had saddled long ago."
I love that image. Saddling the horse.
It implies he was a total opportunist. He saw the horse waiting there, already saddled, and he just jumped on.
And the core of that nationalism, the saddle, if you will, was this idea that Kosovo is the most expensive Serbian word.
That is a famous line from the poet Matija Bećković.
Yeah, without blood it couldn't have been bought, without blood it couldn't be sold. It sends a shiver down your spine because you know exactly what comes next.
It creates a logic where compromise is literally impossible. The sources talk about this concept of the Kosovo-Jadovno axis.
Let's unpack that because it sounds super technical, but it's actually really scary when you dig into it.
So Kosovo is the spiritual base, the cradle of the nation. Jadovno refers to these WWII massacre pits in Croatia where Serbs were killed by the Ustaše regime. The narrative actively connected these two things.
Linking the cradle to the graves.
Right. It said essentially, where there are Serbian graves, that is Serbia.
Which is a terrifying political platform if you live in a multi-ethnic country.
Exactly. If your borders are defined by where your ancestors are buried rather than where people currently live, you are laying the direct groundwork for territorial expansion. You are preparing the psychological ground for war. You are telling people, we must expand to protect the dead.
And war is exactly what happened. Fast forwarding into the 1990s, the breakup of Yugoslavia is incredibly violent. It is messy. And we obviously can't cover every battle in this deep dive,
right?
But we absolutely have to talk about the consequences of this rhetoric. And the darkest point is undeniably Srebrenica in July 1995.
Yeah. The ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, provides very stark facts here. We are talking about the systematic execution of between 7,000 and 8,000 Muslim men and boys in the span of just about 1 week.
Which is staggering. And one thing that really stood out in the source material was the mention of the Scorpions video.
Yes. This came out during the trials much later in 2005.
Because for a long time there was denial in Serbia.
Yeah, huge denial.
Yeah.
The narrative was it didn't happen or it was just rogue elements. But then this footage appeared of a Serbian paramilitary unit, the Scorpions, actually executing prisoners. And when that was shown on Serbian television, it completely shocked the public. It made the horror undeniable.
And the expert analysis from the tribunal is crucial here, specifically regarding the fog of war defense.
Right. There is often this defense in conflicts that these killings were a crime of passion or revenge or just chaotic warfare getting out of hand. The tribunal rejected that completely. They had the receipts, literally.
They had fuel logs.
They had fuel logs, they had vehicle records for bulldozers. The prosecution pointed out that you don't kill 8,000 people in a week by accident.
No, you need logistics.
You need buses to transport them. You need massive amounts of ammunition. You need heavy machinery to dig the mass graves. And then you need even more resources to dig them up again and move them to secondary graves just to hide the evidence.
That is sickening.
It is. The tribunal tribunal ruled this was a highly planned operation, and they legally ruled it was genocide.
That level of logistical planning for something so horrific is chilling. But while this is happening on the front lines, I want to pivot to what life was like for the people in Serbia who weren't on the battlefield. Because Milosevic's policies brought down crushing international sanctions.
The home front was incredibly bleak. The sources describe a complete economic collapse. Hyperinflation was rampant.
We are talking about printing billion dinar notes that were worthless by lunchtime. Right?
Exactly. You needed a wheelbarrow of cash to buy a loaf of bread. But what's fascinating from a sociological perspective is the gray economy.
The black market.
Everything moved to the black market. And this created a weird, twisted society. The sources mention a specific irony that really highlights the dysfunction.
Oh, I know what you're going to say, the medical supplies.
Yes, you couldn't find essential medicines anywhere. Insulin was totally scarce. Basic anesthetics were missing in state hospitals.
But you could buy Viagra.
Exactly. Smugglers brought in high-profit items, so you had a society where the sick couldn't get basic treatment, but luxury black market goods were readily available if you had the right connections.
And the isolation wasn't just economic, it was cultural too.
That is a huge part of the damage. A whole generation of young people, scientists, and intellectuals were just cut off from the globe. No academic journals coming in, no international travel.
So total bubble.
You had a massive brain drain, but for those who stayed, they were living in an isolated alternate reality.
And the regime actually used that scarcity as a weapon against its own people, didn't it?
They absolutely did. They politicized basic needs. If a town voted for the opposition, suddenly the heating oil wouldn't show up in the middle of winter.
Wow.
The European Union actually had to run a program called Energy for Democracy just to get fuel directly to opposition-held towns so people wouldn't freeze.
So you have a population that is isolated, broke, freezing, and watching their country become a global pariah. This brings us to part 4, the fall. Because eventually something had to give.
And strangely enough, it didn't come from the established political opposition parties initially. It came from the kids.
Otpor.
Otpor, which means resistance, founded in 1998 by university students.
And I love their strategy. They looked at the regime and basically said, we aren't going to fight you with guns, we're going to mock you.
Humor was their main weapon. They understood that Milošević relied heavily on fear and this image of being the strong man, the solemn protector of the nation.
Right, the guy who says no one should dare to beat you.
Exactly. And if you laugh at a dictator, you take away that aura of power. They used brilliant branding. They had that iconic clenched fist symbol.
And the slogan, Gotov je.
Gotov je, he is finished. Simple, undeniable, effective. They plastered it everywhere, on trash cans, on police stations, on walls. Their goal was very specific: to transform the political culture and convince regular people that the regime actually wasn't invincible.
And they actively worked on the police too, which is fascinating.
That was a critical tactical move. They knew that when the big protest eventually came, they needed the police to hesitate. So they handed out flowers to riot cops, they sent cookies to police stations.
Seal them with kindness.
Exactly. They wanted the guys standing behind the riot shield to see them as just kids, not as enemies of the state.
So fast forward to September 2000. Elections are held. And Milošević actually loses to Vojislav Kočunica.
But true to form, he refuses to accept the result. He claims it has to go to a runoff. He tries to steal it right in front of everyone.
And country just says no.
The country stops working. October 5th, 2000. This is the big climax. You have a massive general strike. But the pivotal moment, the thing that really broke the regime, involves the miners at Kolubara.
Why the miners specifically?
Because they produced the coal that generated half of Serbia's entire electricity supply. When they went on strike, the lights literally threatened to go out across the country.
That's incredible leverage.
The regime panicked and tried to send in the police to break the strike, but the police refused to attack the miners. That was the signal.
That was the checkmate.
Exactly. If you lose the coal miners and you lose the police, you are done.
And then you have the massive march on Belgrade, the bulldozer revolution.
Called that because of the incredibly iconic image of a bulldozer driving straight through the police barricades at the state TV station. But honestly, the most important thing that happened that day was what didn't happen.
The police didn't fire on the crowd.
The police didn't fire. The army stayed in their barracks. Milošević sat in his villa, waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for the generals to save him, and nobody called.
And he finally concedes on national television.
It was over. The Tsar had no clothes.
But the story doesn't end there. because there was still the very heavy matter of justice.
Right. Remember, Milošević had already been indicted by the ICTY back in May 1999. He was the first sitting head of state ever to be indicted for war crimes.
So now he is out of power, just living in Serbia. What happens next?
Well, the new democratic government, led by Prime Minister Zoran Đinđić, is in a really tough spot. The country is completely bankrupt, and the U.S. and the international community are basically saying, if you want financial aid, if you want to rejoin the world, you have to hand him over.
So it was highly transactional?
In part, yes. It was pure pragmatism. In June 2001, Đinđić orchestrates the transfer. Milošević is flown to The Hague.
And the trial. The trial was an absolute marathon.
It was massive. It lasted for years, 90 days of prosecution alone. And Milošević, he didn't hire a lawyer. He chose to represent himself.
And he wasn't exactly quiet about it.
Not at all. He was incredibly combative. He cross-examined witnesses himself. He dragged out the process at every turn. He really treated the courtroom as just another political platform.
Right. He refused to even recognize the legitimacy of the court.
He called it a political tool. He used his time to speak directly to his supporters back home.
And then, right before the end,
March 2006. He dies in his cell from a heart attack, just weeks before the trial was finally set to conclude.
So there was no verdict.
No final verdict. And that is a source of massive frustration for the victims. They wanted to see the word guilty on paper, but the legal experts on the tribunal argue strongly that the trial wasn't a waste.
How so? What's the silver lining there?
Because it established a permanent public record. We talked about the Scorpions video, the military documents, the intercepts, the fuel logs. All of that evidence was presented and is now public record. You can't erase it.
It prevents historical denial.
Exactly. And the trial chamber actually issued a specific decision after the prosecution rested, stating that based on the evidence presented, a reasonable judge could convict him. So the foundation was solid.
The evidence was there, even if the final gavel didn't literally fall.
Exactly. The history was permanently written.
When you look at this full arc, from the man standing in Kosovo Polje saying no one should dare to beat you, to the man dying alone in a cell in The Hague, it is a tragedy on a national scale.
It really is. He started by promising protection to his people. He tapped into that most expensive word, Kosovo, and the deep, deep history of Serbian suffering. But in the end, the price of his power was paid by everyone else.
It was paid in blood by the victims in Bosnia and Croatia.
And it was paid in lost years, poverty, and isolation by the people of Serbia.
He saddled the horse, but he rode it straight off a cliff.
That is a very apt way to put it. And he dragged the entire country down with him.
It really makes you think about how fragile democracy can be and how potent that mix of bureaucracy and myth truly is. I mean, think about it. The mechanisms of a modern state can be completely hijacked by a single intoxicating story if people are feeling paralyzed enough to believe it. That is something you have to keep an eye on, even today.
Absolutely. A myth that promises you protection can very easily become your prison.
Thank you for listening. Do not forget to click like and subscribe and write your opinion in the comment section.